Thank you, everybody. Good morning. I'm honored to be able to share with us this morning. And as I do, I want to just let you know there's a handout that I want to encourage you to use while I speak. It's got some blanks in it. I'll be filling in the blanks for you as we talk. Somewhere around you on the seat is one. If there's not, there's a lot of them in a stack on both the tables by the exit doors, as well as a few pens. If you need that, I notice there's one pen back there, so if you're fast, you can get that one. And there's several over there. I think you're going to want to have it. That's the main thing. And while you're doing that, I'll just tell you a little bit of background that's going on for me this morning, since we're all really, really close friends. About a month ago, my family and I were on vacation in Michigan, and after playing 3 hours of volleyball, which I haven't done in who knows how long, I decided it would be a good idea to go water skiing too. Threw on a ski, get pulled out of the water, and as I'm coming out, big pop, big pain in my hamstring. I tore a hamstring. The good news is that's rehabilitating fine. The bad news is I don't know how, but somehow I have strained a ligament or gotten something caught in my knee on the same leg in the process. Weird. And most of the steps I take are just fine. But every now and then I take a step and I get this sharp stab and I let out a noise, a yelp. Let's call it a yelp. It's not like a Chihuahua yelp, it's like a big dog growl. Just in case that happens, I'm not planning on it happening, just want to let you know that's what it's about. I'm not speaking in tongues. It's not some kind of prophetic utterance. It's me in momentary agony. I don't think it's going to happen, though. Reaching the other side of conflict is what we're talking about today. Like death and taxes, another thing we can be certain about in life is that we will encounter conflict. As long as there are other people in our lives, we will have differences of opinion. Guaranteed. Conflict happens. Several years ago, in another kind of ministry life that I had, I was in a spiritual leadership role that I literally thought was the calling of my life. It was the culmination of my experience, my background, my sense of passion or calling, and I just felt honored to be able to do it. I thought I would be doing it the rest of my life. It turned out that one person in particular did not agree with me. And it also turned out that, in fact, that was really the only person whose opinion actually mattered. We had a different opinion as to approach toward how to pursue this ministry, and it ended up with him staying on and me leaving. I thought it was the calling of my life. I encountered a conflict. It resulted in a gigantic change for me. He continued on for another couple of years. My path took a giant detour. Why does conflict happen? There are a number of reasons, but I'm putting on the screen here several that I think are the key ones. People have different values, and we value our values. Our lives are guided and directed by our values, whether or not we know it. There's something inside of us steering us toward what we believe. People have different temperaments. We may think our temperament is best, and we also may assume everybody else agrees. Not always the case. People have different expectations, and we don't like to lose control over our expectations and what the end results will be in our lives. People attach their significance to their opinions, roles, and influence. Their identity is wrapped up in their opinions. When you have people, conflict happens automatically. It almost always represents a threat or a direct attack to our values, our temperament, our expectations, and probably most deeply, our sense of significance. when our opinion, our expectations, our values are ignored, it feels like our significance, our identity is attacked. And just for the record, I need to say, I'm speaking on this topic this morning not because I'm blissfully removed from all conflict in my life. I'm not. I've encountered it. I'm speaking on this morning for all of us, myself included. I like to speak on topics that I need to learn from myself. I can say that one of my values, one of my priorities is when I experience conflict with another person, I want to see that resolved as soon as I can. And I can say that in most cases that I'm aware of anyway, conflict has been resolved. I can also tell you I've experienced a significant conflict in recent years that took a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of investment on my part and on the part of the other person to find resolution. I'm in this with you folks. We see conflict everywhere. In the workplace, resulting in stories like ones many of you could tell. We see it at home, resulting in coldness and sometimes broken marriages and broken families. We see it in the community, resulting in Gazette stories of homeowners associations run amok. I see these a lot. In the church and in ministry, we even see conflict. Burl and I were on a missionary team in yet another ministry career of ours where we experienced conflict every now and then. One of our team members had some irritating habits. He spoke in a very loud voice, especially when in public. Now, we lived in Vienna, Austria, and the Viennese did not value loud voices in public. He wore shorts and sandals during the winter and in snow. It seemed to us just so that he could kind of stand out. And worst of all, he chewed ice with his mouth wide open, smacking his lips and his tongue with a big smile on his face. Kind of irritating. Well into our time with this team, several months, we were at a team dinner, probably 12 people sitting around the table, and I decided to resolve a conflict with this guy when I suggested, do you think you could possibly shut your trap while you're chewing your ice? Probably not the best approach in retrospect. I'm glad to say he and I did not become missionary casualties, as is sometimes the case. Burl and I stayed with that team for 5 years. He stayed for 30. So we moved on. And immediately afterward, I apologized to him. Man, that was not the way for me to handle this. Conflict even happens in church and ministry. We see examples in the early church, the council in Jerusalem, Acts 15, 1 through 35. Arguments between believers about the significance or the requirement of circumcision following conversion. Two sides had completely opposing opinions based on spiritual beliefs. That pattern still happens today. Two opposing sides within the church based on spiritual beliefs. We see broken partnership between Paul and Barnabas, who agreed, let's just part company. This is not working out. You go your way, I'll go my way. The inability of Christians to work together in harmony continues today. Even Jesus and his disciples experienced conflict. Matthew 16, 18. Jesus said to Peter, who is known as Simon for most of his life, some of the most amazing words ever spoken to a human being. You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not stand against it. 5 verses later, after Peter made an insubordinate, presumptuous comment about Jesus' calling, Jesus spun to him and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me." 5 verses later. possibly the biggest U-turn in relationships in all of Scripture in the shortest period of time. Even Jesus and the disciples experienced conflict. Conflict happens, folks. We shouldn't deny it. We shouldn't feel ashamed about it, and sometimes we do. The key issue is, what do we do about it? How do we resolve conflict? And that's what I want to talk about today. Scripture gives some great guidelines, and we're familiar with them. Matthew 18, 15 through 17, we'll refer to this in a few minutes. Matthew 7, 1 through 5, we'll refer to it in a few minutes. But where I want to start is Philippians 2, 1 through 5. And you might not have thought of this as a passage regarding conflict, but here's where I want the foundation of our conversation to be today. Philippians 2, 1 through 5. If you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. In our walk, we are called to have the attitude of Jesus in everything we do, in every encounter that we have, especially with other Christians. And so as we pursue the resolution of conflict, I'd like to point out 7 important attitudes for us to keep in mind. And many of them come out of this passage. Some come from some other passages I'll refer to. First of all, an attitude of unity. That's kind of that first blank you see on your page. An attitude of unity. The second verse that we just read in Philippians 2. Make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. This is our calling as brothers and sisters, followers of Christ. Unity in the Spirit. We also see this in Colossians 3, 13 and 14. Here's what that says. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Let that sink in, just that one sentence. Bear with each other, forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. Over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Over everything I've told you, Paul says, put on love. It binds us together in unity. In resolving conflict, unity is to be our goal. Not victory, not suppression, not control, not win. Unity. That's the highest priority. Unity. And an attitude of forgiveness is the doorway. It results in unity. A second attitude for us coming from this passage is an attitude of humility and compassion. Verse 3 of Philippians 2. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. In humility, consider others better than yourselves. A spirit of humility and compassion. Put yourself in the shoes of the other person. What would it feel like if I were him living his life? If I were her married to me? What would that feel like? And I was reminded of another example from our missionary experience, another team member, that we had a hard time understanding. Not so much getting along with him, just understanding. The best word I could find to describe him is goofy. He had goofy hair. He dressed in a goofy way. He had a very goofy perspective on life. His sense of humor was goofy. Numerous times, he would say something and just start chuckling, all by himself, just having a great time by himself. The rest of us are looking at him like, I don't even know where the punchline was. He was just odd. He was socially embarrassing. He really often didn't know the right things to say in public, and it stood out. And then one evening, he asked me to drive him to language school. He was studying either German or Russian. And on the way, I said, hey, tell me your story. Where are you from? I knew the state he was from, but what's the background? Tell me your story. Abandoned by his dad as a kid. Alcoholic mother. Teased mercilessly by everybody he knew as a boy, as a teenager, into high school. Failed at just about everything he tried. Attempted suicide, as I remember, twice. Even failed at that. And when I heard this story in about 20 minutes, I was pierced, absolutely pierced, at my condescending, judgmental attitude about this guy whose hair looked odd to me. Pierced. What would it feel like to be him? Craig, what would it feel like to have lived his life? Now shut up. Love. Have compassion. Be humble. A third attitude for us to have in coming to the other side of conflict is an attitude of self-examination. Here's where I want to refer to Matthew 7, 1 through 5. And this is the passage that refers to going to someone else and saying, you got a speck in your eye. And the passage says, well, check out the log in your own. It's a very blunt, direct passage, but I read it in the Message. I've got to read you this. Matthew 7, 1 through 5 in the Message. Don't pick on people, jump on their failures, criticize their faults, unless, of course, you want the same treatment. That critical spirit has a way of boomeranging. It's easy to see a smudge on your neighbor's face and be oblivious to the ugly sneer on your own. Do you have the nerve to say, here, let me wash your face for you, when your own face is distorted by contempt? It's this whole traveling roadshow mentality all over again, playing a holier-than-thou part instead of just living your part. Wipe that ugly sneer off your own face, and you might be fit to offer a washcloth to your own neighbor. Any questions? Man is that direct. Leaves no questions. Look in the mirror. Take a look at ourselves. Wipe that sneer off our own face before we're wanting to wipe a smudge off of someone else's. By the same attitude we judge, we will be judged. We may have a log in our eye. This attitude is a big one, and it's key. It's huge. I want to tell us a story that kind of relates a key principle in this one. A number of years ago, Burl and I went to a Blockbuster near where we lived at the time, and we took our dog, Tucker. Drove to the parking lot, went inside, and for Burl and me, a visit to Blockbuster back in the day, you can tell this is an old story. They don't exist anymore, I don't think. It would take 15, 20 minutes for us to finally find the movie that we wanted to land on. I walked inside. By the way, we left Tucker in the van with the windows just kind of cracked a little bit in the back, so he had air to breathe. Walked inside the door, and I said to Burl, hey, hon, you just decide. I'd really rather be out here with Tucker, keep an eye on him. I was in the store for 15 seconds and walked out to the parking lot, and there was a lady standing by our van with her fingers in the window that I left open, just kind of a little slot. Kind of reaching in, and I thought, oh, dog lover, wants to pet Tucker. In 5 seconds, I changed my opinion, because her hand went from here to in here, and she's now unlocking the door. And I'm thinking, this is inappropriate public behavior. So I walked over to the side of the door and I said, ma'am, what are you doing? By now, she's unlocked the door and she is opening it. Well, you just don't do that. She's opening the door. She grabbed Tucker by the throat, wrapped her arm around him, and started pulling him out of the back seat. I said, no longer ma'am, lady, what are you doing with my dog? And she came back with a response that I just wasn't anticipating. You stole my dog. I'm rescuing her. What? You stole my dog. Lady, this is not your dog. This is my dog. You're in my van. You stole my dog. You jumped over the fence in my yard, grabbed my dog, and came over here. I had no idea what to say. She's now strangling my dog. I didn't want to, I didn't want to beat her up or something like that. So I pinned her against the side of the van and the door, and I'm, in a close embrace with a lady I just really didn't want to even have a relationship with. I'm holding her there, trying to figure out, what do I do? I had no idea what to say. I mean, this is a conflict. There were two Blockbuster guys on the sidewalk selling DVDs because those are going ridiculously out of style. And I said, hey, you guys, we got a problem here. Call the police. While I'm pinning this lady against the van. Conflict. Difference of opinion. Her temperament was not the same as mine. I wanted my dog to live. It didn't look to me like she wanted hers to. I was trying to figure out, how do we resolve this thing? Clueless. By the way, she had a little girl with her, maybe 5 or 7, something like that. And so I was thinking, all right, how do we resolve this? I got an idea. Let's put Tucker on the ground in the parking lot, and this lady stands one place, I stand another. We call his name, and then whoever he goes, wait a sec. We call his name. And I turned to the lady and I said, what's your dog's name? Angel. Is Angel a boy or a girl? Angel's a girl. Okay. I know how we're going to resolve this. And I just got to say, I was at the end of my patience here, and back then I wasn't as good a Christian as I am today. But I just said, all I could say was, hey, if Angel's a girl, how come she has a... You know what I'm thinking about. And this stunned look came over her face, and she said to her daughter, sweetheart, check out between Angel's legs. She does. Do you see anything there? Yeah, Angel's got a... Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you stole Angel. Now we've proven it's Tucker after all. What's the point of the story? The point of the story is when we have a gap of understanding about another person's behavior, the assumptions that we make to fill in the gap reflect more about us than about the other person. Huge principle here. She made the assumption, her dog's in my car, therefore I'm the thief. She made that assumption about me, a complete stranger, no idea who I am, what my values are. She filled in the blank with some information and was convinced she was right, and it said everything about who she was. She was, in fact, the dog napper, not me. Huge principle, folks. When we are lacking some information, the assumptions we make about the other person say more about us than about the other person. Our accusations are most often true about us. A fourth attitude to pay attention to is one of courage. Matthew 18:15 through 17 is the other passage I listed earlier. Here's what that says. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault, just between the two of you. And if they listen to you, you've won them over. But if they will not listen, take 1 or 2 others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, then treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. When I read these verses, I think of those steps, every one of them requires courage. You have a difference of opinion, a conflict with another person. This passage says, go to them. That takes great courage. If necessary, then bring another person or two. Hey, I'm having a problem. Would you please come with me? That takes great courage. And if it still isn't resolved, to go to the church. Don't just let it go. Don't just leave them out of your lives. Don't just think awful things about them. Bring it to the church. It takes great courage every step of the way to resolve conflict. And then we got to admit, at the end it says, if they still will not resolve the conflict with you, treat them as if he's from the IRS. Now, apologies to anybody from the IRS here today, but you know, everybody has a certain opinion. You don't really want to hang out with them anymore. But up until that point, courage, courage, courage. A fifth attitude is focusing on the issue, not the person. Almost nothing kills relationship and the opportunity for resolution of conflict more than an approach that attacks the other person rather than the issue at hand. There should never be any name calling. You idiot. How dumb can you get? You know, statements like that destroy relationship. Immediately, they don't work toward resolution. Indirect demeaning of a person is little better. Saying things like, that was the most stupid decision I've ever seen anybody ever make. My 5-year-old could have done a better job. Do we say these things to our spouse, to our children, to a colleague at work? It demeans them. It undermines them, and it almost ruins any possibility of resolution of conflict. And it's also little better to demean a person's decision, maybe not them, but their decision or their opinion. A number of years ago, a friend of mine had a conversation with a colleague, a number of conversations, with whom he had a difference of opinion over a shared concern that they had. And they both felt very strongly one way or the other. Neither one of them was wrong. It was just a difference of opinion on a crucial matter. And they kept talking about it, and it was not getting resolved. And finally, my friend took a risk. He said, Rick, this is an area of personal sensitivity for me. I'm going to lay my heart on the table here. I know my opinion may not sound rational. It may not make sense strategically. It may even be a point of woundedness for me. I admit that. I'm just telling you, I'm deeply sensitive about this issue, and I can't really give any ground on it. Would you please try to understand? Pretty self-revealing comment. Rick made the comment in return, well, that's very small-minded of you. Well, needless to say, you know, the relationship and conversation didn't go that well from there on out. Not necessarily name-calling or attacking the person, but demeaning the opinion. That's so small-minded. Folks, when we use this kind of language, attacking the person and not the issue, it's over. It's over. If we really want resolution, focus on the issue itself. Here's a template I've seen, you've probably seen it too, that I think is helpful to use as a guideline in talking with someone with a different opinion. When you blank, I feel blank. When you criticize me in front of others, an action, I feel demeaned, an emotion. When you cut my pay without any warning at all, I feel disrespected and angry. I'm just saying. A bad example would be when you make stupid, self-serving decisions, not a good way to start, I feel a desire to wring your neck. No, back up and start over again. The template uses an undeniable action. No adjectives, no subtle attacking, just an action. When you do this, or you did that, and then it uses an undeniable emotion. I feel blank. Does that make any difference to you? Do you understand now why this is a problem for me? When you do this, I feel this. Could we please go from there and try to find some kind of resolution? This formula works because it attributes only unarguable action on the other person's part and unarguable feelings on our part. They can't tell us what we feel. We just do. A sixth attitude of resolving conflict, getting to the other side of conflict, is speaking the truth in love. This comes from Ephesians 4. And when you have the time, you might want to read 1 through 15. Verse 2 refers once again to keeping the unity. Verse 13 refers to reaching unity in the faith, reaching the other side of conflict. But it's verse 15 that I really want to refer to. Here's what it says. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of Him who is the head, that is, Christ. Speaking the truth in love. Folks, to me, this is the core of conflict resolution. If there's anything you remember from this morning, I ask you to remember this. If we were in a class, I was your teacher, and I was going to give you a final exam tomorrow, I would say, this question will be on the test. Try to remember this one. Speak the truth in love. Because so often we don't. This slide you'll see next is a conflict resolution grid. I first saw it in a book called When You Don't Agree, written by James Fairfield. I've adapted it a little bit. But it shows how we value relationship to a degree, from low to high, and accomplishing a goal or a task to a degree, from low to high. Each one of us is in a different place on those gradients. We all tend to value both of these things one way or another, but sometimes, often, one of them to an extreme. And almost always one of them more than the other. Relationship or task accomplishment. The degree to which we lean toward an extreme and encounter others of the opposite extreme is the degree to which we will run into a conflict with that person. There are 5 possible responses or endpoints in conflict. And those should be pretty apparent for you. Withdraw is one of them. It reflects a low concern for relationship and a low concern for accomplishing goals. I don't care about you. I don't care about resolution. I'm out of here. Withdraw. Yield reflects a high concern for relationship, but a low concern for accomplishing a goal or a task. I don't want to hurt your feelings. I don't want to break your heart. I don't want to offend you. Yeah, you do whatever you want. It's fine with me. I don't really care. That's yield. Win is the opposite. A high concern for accomplishing a goal or a task, but low concern for relationship. Let's get to the end point. I don't care how it affects you. Compromise is in the middle. And it's often suggested as the best approach toward conflict because it reflects a mid-level of both of these values. Compromise can be okay. But I'm telling you, it depends on the value of the value at risk. How important is the issue that we are having conflict about? Sometimes we can compromise. Sometimes we can't. A parent and child disagree over the tasks required for allowance, exactly what has to be done in order to get exactly how much money. We can compromise on this. We can find a midpoint. Let's work it out. But as in the case of the 2 mothers who brought their child, or their claim to a child, to Solomon, compromise is sometimes simply unacceptable. One of these mothers chose to give up her own baby for it to live, rather than compromise and cut the baby in half. Sometimes, in fact, often, simple compromise isn't the place to land because the value at risk is far more important than just cutting it in half. Resolve is the best place to land. It reflects a high concern for relationship. It reflects a high concern for accomplishment of a task or a goal. On the next slide, we'll see Paul tells us to speak the truth in love. And here's where I've added an element that to me is such a crucial thing to keep in mind. Truth and love are admirable values. But when we press truth-telling to the point that it carries no sense of love or respect or concern for relationship, we become belligerent and dominant to other people. I want to ask for a raise of hands. It's represented by the person whose goal in the chart is win. I don't care how she feels about it. I'm going to make my point. I'm going to get my way one way or the other. One way or the other. That's win. When we emphasize love or salvaging relationship to the point that we withhold the truth, we become fearful, hesitant, people-pleasing. This approach is represented by the person whose response is to yield. It may seem more Christ-like, but in truth, it does not reflect Jesus' approach. Seems to me, I remember Jesus saying to hypocrites, "You whitewashed graves, you brood of vipers. Here's the truth about you." I don't hear any yield in those words. Jesus spoke the truth when it needed to be said. Bill Hybels of Willow Creek Church encourages us to have the courage to tell the last 10% of the truth, because it's that last 10% that's so hard to say, but it's also the last 10% that gives the greatest opportunity for 100% resolution. The last 10%. You know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm talking about. It's easy to talk about this, but here's really the crux of the matter. How do we tell that truth in love? Each one of us leans toward one of these values, relationship or task accomplishment, more than the other. There's nothing wrong with either. In fact, God designed both. It's when we carry them to an extreme that excludes the other value that we settle for incomplete resolution and the potential for repeated conflict over and over. Those of us who tend toward relationship can be paralyzed by fear. We need to press into the telling of the last 10% of truth in order to be sure we've been heard, courageously, lovingly. Conversely, those of us who tend toward goal accomplishment or task orientation can come across as angry or inconsiderate of others. When we say that last 10%, we need to wrap it with love and tenderness and compassion. In any case, the choices to yield and withdraw can be influenced by fear. The choice to win is often influenced by anger. The choice to compromise may be best, but often it only results in lose-lose. Most often, the goal for us to pursue here is speak the truth in love. I love you. I care about you. I want to maintain this relationship, but I will not give ground on telling you the truth. I've got to say this. That brings resolution. Last attitude I want to refer to is an attitude of trust in God's sovereignty. In the end, we will encounter conflict. We're on a sacred journey, a pilgrimage of transformation, in which God uses that conflict to transform us. Many times, the trials we encounter will come in the form of conflict, and we need to submit in one way or another. When we don't get our preference, there are at least three possible responses. One, that person got her way, I didn't, but I'm going to fight her every step of the way. Second possible response. That person got her way, I didn't. I'm going to resist her underground, passively, until she fails. Third possible response. That person got her way, I didn't. But I will work with her to make this work. Because ultimately, God is sovereign. God's in charge of the whole deal anyway. That's where we can land. God is sovereign. He's in the business of redemption. Roland mentioned just at the end of his comments here about how God redeems and brings redemption. Does he bring every mess up, every screw up into our lives? No, I don't believe he does. I'm perfectly capable of doing some of those on my own. Or the choices of other people have consequences, ripple effect in my life that honestly God has nothing to do with starting. But God redeems them. God transforms us through them. I want to mention the example of Joseph in the Old Testament. Probably relatively few of us can relate directly to the experience that he had of being abandoned by her siblings, portrayed as having been eaten by wild animals, sold as a slave, put in prison, tempted by the wife of the most powerful man in the land, and holding firm to our faith. Probably relatively few of us can experience that sort of conflict and loss in life. Yet Joseph remained faithful. He believed that God was sovereign. When you have a chance, read Genesis 50, 15 to 21. But it's the description of when Joseph's brothers who betrayed him now encounter him as the most powerful man in the land other than Pharaoh. And what was Joseph's response? He wept. He wept. And his attitude was, you intended it for harm. God intended it for good. I hold no grudge against you because ultimately God is sovereign. Ultimately God is in charge. I can let go and I can forgive. That should be my attitude as well. God is God. I'm just Craig. Well, I want to go back to that story of one of the most painful experiences of my life where what I thought was my calling ended up not being. And another guy said to me, basically, you don't measure up. I never felt that they literally meant it for harm, but it did cause me enormous pain, sadness, fear, anger, shame, almost every day for quite a while. They didn't intend it for harm, but man, did it cause harm. But ultimately, God used it for good. I don't know how many men came to me and referred to Joseph's story and said, Craig, God intends this for good. He will use it in your life. He will redeem even this. And it's true for all of us, folks. I can say, based on that story, one of the most painful experiences of my life, an opinion that I had differing from another's that did not go my way, resulted in me being in Colorado. Me leading a ministry to men that reflects my values, my heart, my priorities. Me being here today. It's as simple as that. Because I did not get my way, I'm with you today. Others may intend it for harm, but God uses it for good. He redeems. Last slide. Here are the 7 attitudes for us to have when we encounter conflict, and if we want to reach the other side. You can read them on your own. But it's a reminder to us from these passages, winning is not the goal. Victory is not the goal when we encounter conflict with another. The goal is to reach the other side, to find resolution, to walk in unity, to be compassionate, to be humble, and to remember that God is in charge. In the end, conflict happens, but God redeems if we allow him to. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for these reminders this morning from your word, from our own spirits that speak to us, from your Spirit that guides us and comforts us. I pray regarding all of the conflict that's happening in any life here today. There are hundreds of stories right now in this room of conflict. And I pray, Father, that you will remind us of these attitudes for us to have. Whether the person is a believer or not, whether the person is in our family or not, to reach the other side of conflict through the attitudes that you, Jesus, demonstrated, even though you were God. Our attitude will be like Christ. Please help us to live that out. In Jesus' name, amen.